Now, an important goal of the partnership that we have is to study and devise efficient ways and means of helping women become leaders, able to impact policy in their societies. We focus on leadership because every insight gained from history and from our own experience points to the indispensability of politics to successful claims to rights. To become politically relevant, women must become leaders, we believe. And leadership is mostly communication. To become leaders, women must learn to communicate with their world, their history, their culture, society, and political system. Women leaders and organizations that are partners of WLP come from societies and cultures that represent more than 500 million Muslim women across the world. They belong to different lands, climates, societies, and cultures. They agree that though women represented are different from one another, they all share one overarching characteristic. They face a spectrum of opposing values and forces that compete for their allegiance. The most taxing contradiction they face today is the one between the demands of modernity and the requirements of tradition as determined and advanced by the modern Islamist worldview. At the center of this conflict is the dilemma of Muslim women's human rights, whether Muslim women have rights because they are human beings or whether they have rights because they are Muslim women. We all agree also that despite the contemporary vogue of fundamentalist Islam, it is not Islam that holds women back. Rather, it is the path that history of patriarchy in Muslim-majority societies has taken that limits their freedom. The women note that the status of women in society has been the same across history for a majority of the world's population, regardless of religion, creed, ethnicity, or nationality. Except for surface differences, really, the basic arrangements of power, the basic relationships within the family, community, and society, the division of labor and power between women and men have been the same across the world. A woman's right to decide major decisions in her life, major choices about her children's future, about place of residence, about marriage, inheritance, employment, and the like, have been severely curtailed in most of the world during most of human history. They also agree that freedom, gender equality, and democracy, as we define them today, are functions of historical change, social, economic, political, and cultural change over time. If women in the developing world are in a relatively inferior political as well as social and economic position, it is not only because historically the framework of their social existence has been crafted by men, a fact they share with women in all societies, but also because they have begun fighting for their rights later in history. The women note that until the turn of the previous century, when New Zealand first gave the women the right to vote, nowhere on earth can a woman vote or to stand for office. By mid-20th century, most women could, but very few of them had high-level leadership positions. Today, approximate gender parity exists in certain Northern European countries, such as Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, where women constitute more than 41% of the membership in national parliaments, are equal in number to men in secondary school, and also in employment that is non-agricultural and paid activity. In most other parts of the world, political participation measured by the number of women in national parliaments is between 9.6 and 21.8%, relatively low, but a palpable improvement compared to the year 2000. In 2000, in Muslim-majority societies, women's share of seats in national parliaments was below 5%. In the Middle East, it was 3.6%. Today, in the Arab states, women's share in parliaments is 9.6%, still the lowest in the world, but far better than their share 10 years ago. It's important to note that women's participation in decision-making that does not always follow socioeconomic development or democracy. Rwanda, for example, is the only country in the world where women are a majority in the parliament. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index for the year 2007, many highly developed countries rank below many less developed countries. Among them, the United States, 31st, below Estonia and Namibia, Switzerland, 40th, below Jamaica and Panama, France, 51%, below Uganda, Italy, 84%, below Kenya. The index measures gender gaps in 4 major categories: economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, political empowerment, and health and survival. It does not focus on culture or policy or women's empowerment. Nevertheless, if gender gaps in these categories are bridged, empowerment is likely to follow, though it requires leadership mobilization and cooperation. Once a process of empowerment takes shape, it becomes increasingly difficult for governments or extremist groups to reverse. Iran, before and after the Islamic Revolution, offers an instructive example. At the time of the constitutional revolution in Iran in 1906, the country was organized on precepts that for centuries had defined the subordinate position of women as the natural and therefore expected order of things. The nascent civil society, small and unformed, faced the issue of women primarily as a problem between traditionalism and modernism. As the moderns, mostly men, but also some women, grew in size and influence, women received more support. However, the frame of reference for this support remained largely traditional. Women were allowed to get an education in order to raise better children, in order to have better husbands, in order to make better societies. The process, nevertheless, brought men and women together, allowing women to gain experience in the workings of society, including the operations of government. By the time I became Secretary General of the Women's Organization in 1970, I was a child Secretary General at that time, women had gained the right to vote and be elected to Parliament and had already passed the seminal family protection law that altered the position of women. Women's expectation of what a reasonable social order ought to be had dramatically changed, though they did not yet participate significantly in high-level decision-making or had yet articulated their desire to move beyond being man's complement to being a complete person with comprehensive rights as human being and as citizen.